Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. So far, we are on verse 7, a rather long verse because it consists of different words, which are all values in themselves. And we have covered value 1. So repeat after me for memory purposes. Amanitwam. Amanitwam. This is whereby the person gets rid of their unrealistic expectations. This means having a certain expectation how I should be treated by you. So this means the person is careful or cautious not to consistently demand that sense of how I should and what should happen around me in order to kind of validate my self-image of myself. In other words, reducing that need for demanding of respect. So value 1, amanitwam. That's number 1. Value 2, adambhitwam. Repeat, adambhitwam. This is inventing details. That means making up stories that didn't exist or blowing up things that are meant to impress you. In other words, it didn't happen at all. So I create something to get a positive response from you so that I may feel good. Or I remember something that is rather small. It's insignificant, but then I add more stories and I just make it exaggerated. The value 3 is ahimsa. This is a living and alertful life in order to avoid injury whenever and wherever possible. And we said that ahimsa has 3 topics. So the question is how to practice ahimsa. It is by practicing 3 components. The first component is the mental. This means how do we use our mind in respect to whatever we are thinking about. If I'm thinking about a person, my neighbor, there is a connection, there is a relationship between this thought and my neighbor. That relationship is called that mental side. So now how do we practice this mental side of ahimsa? And we said that one of them is not about controlling the mind. Because suppose I ask you, hey, what are you going to think in 1 minute from now? Right? It's like, okay. So now imagine the person tries to control their mind and they don't even know what's going to happen. What thought is going to come 5 minutes from now? So in other words, we're not trying to control the mind because that's impossible. The mind has a trajectory of its own based on the conditions, based on your past habits, based on the triggers around you. Maybe you hear some sound in distance or someone's driving a car, and that itself, that sound modifies the kind of trajectory of your thoughts, which can also modify the kind of day that you have because the day is a reflection of the kind of thoughts that you have. But rather about managing the kind of thoughts that you have. So we cannot control, but we can manage. So what's the difference between controlling and managing? Controlling is applying a technique that is a one-off. Managing is rather a consistent, deliberate attempt to steer your thoughts in a way that empowers you. In other words, we have something in Sanskrit called pratipaksha bhavana. Pratipaksha bhavana is whereby you have one thought that is rather disempowering. It's a distasteful thought about someone or something. And then you ask yourself, what is an opposite version of this thought? Because the question is, since your mind chose to have thought A, does that not imply that you might as well have the choice to choose thought B? Absolutely. So pratipaksha bhavana is acknowledging this thought and saying, okay, so here's what it is. So what is the opposite version of this thought? And then you say, well, here's what I can find that is rather appealing about this person or about this situation. So this is called pratipaksha bhavana, finding an opposite version of the distasteful thought. And this is one of the tools to be applied in respect to the mental part of ahimsa. Another component of managing your mind, which is the mental, is about having a ready-made list. I tell you, I did this for so many years and it helps so much. So what happens is when we find ourselves triggered, it's already too late. Because then the mind's already on a trajectory of thinking in a specific habit. You know what I'm talking about, right? So suppose someone triggers you and then you kind of get upset or impatient. By then it's already too late. So that is the most time when you need some reminder right next to you. Now, of course, you cannot call it a friend, right? Hey, friend, go look up on Google, or, you're not going to look up on Google how to alleviate my mood or anything, right? So what you can do, and I've done this for years, is write things down a little, like maybe OneNote or some app that you have, and write in bullet points some things that, some different thinking methods that you can apply the moment you have a distasteful thought about something. And one of that, for example, one of my, in my OneNotes, I have like this, it goes angry, impatient, frustrated, question mark. And then immediately, in other words, emoted, question mark. And then immediately when I feel triggered, right, by some component in the society, I immediately open this note because I know it's already too late, because your mind's not thinking creatively when it gets triggered. So I need some help. So I look up this notepad and I see, oh, okay, so ask. So one of the exercises called compassion exercise. So just like me, this person too is trying to be happy. Just like me, this person too only knows so much. Just like me, this person too is looking for peace at the end of the day. And that immediately goes, okay, so we are actually on the same line. We're actually on the same, we have something common to share, instead of, oh, okay, so they're in that side, I'm on this side. And then it just goes into the cycle of black or white thinking. So again, have a little notepad ready to go in your pocket that you can pull out immediately. Why? Because for many years, we have been thinking in a certain specific trajectory of thought. And that is the most time when you need help, is when you get triggered right now. Not when you're okay, because there's no relevance there. But when is it most okay? When is it most relevant? When you actually get triggered. And what happens? You pull out your phone, which is going to be kind of weird, isn't it? So next time you get kind of triggered, you go, one moment, hubby or wife or whatever, let me just pull out my phone, look up, emoted. Okay, so just like me, this person's trying to be happy, right? So just try to kind of keep it casual. Okay, and we also discussed of how to manage your mind. It involves discerning between the kinds of emotions that your mind is having. For example, what's the difference between sorrow and depression? To have sorrow is a natural byproduct of going through some loss. For example, your parents die or someone close to you dies, then we go through a process of sorrow. Someone gets injured, right? Someone that's close to you. So that is a natural process of where the emotions just have to, kind of pour some tears for you to heal so you can move on with your life. But what is the difference between sorrow and depression? Depression is whereby an unconscious thought has been going on in the background constantly for a long time, and I failed to attend to that thought. Now, what happens when you fail to attend to a thought? It builds a trajectory, a momentum of its own. So therefore, one day when a person finds himself suddenly, when that snowball of thought that has been contemplated in the unconscious for so many years, one day it starts to roll down the mountain of the mind. And then the person finds it extremely hard to intercept it because it's got momentum of its own. It's like turning on the fan. And even if it's off, even if you push your hand, it's going to hurt you. In other words, it's still going on. So in other words, what's the difference between sorrow and depression? Sorrow is a natural byproduct of having a loss. Depression is entertaining an unconscious thought and failing to intercept it. And every time we fail to intercept it, we actually give it more power. And therefore, it becomes much harder to intercept next time. So one day the person finds themselves and say, help me. I cannot do anything. Positive thinking doesn't work. Cheering me up doesn't work. Nothing works. Why doesn't it work? Because you haven't attended to these unconscious habits while they were going on in the background for a long time. And often then we say to them, no, just cheer up. No, just be happy. They're already trying to do that. So it's useless telling them statements like this. In other words, it's a different process to treat sorrow from depression. But unfortunately, in most cases, when a person comes to you depressed, you can already know their story. And what is that story? You have been not deliberately, but unconsciously entertaining a certain thread of thought. And this thread of thought has now become a new narrative in the mind. And it's taken over, it's colored in all your entire narratives of your life. And therefore, it is the loudest voice in the mind right now. So therefore, the ideal situation would be to intercept those thoughts before they even have a chance to arise again. So how do we know when to intercept? If the thought keeps on coming, then you can do something about it. That means there is your marker for intercepting it and reframing it in a way that is more pleasing or more tasteful. In other words, I'm not saying now ignore it or push it under the carpet, but rather look at it in a way that you may have missed some details when it first arose. Okay. Now, so that is manasa, that is mind. So the question is, ahimsa practicing involves three: manasa, the mind; speech; and deeds, thoughts. Now let's get on to the speech. So speech, vak. Speech is a natural result of having taken care of your thoughts, because often we think that I need to take care of my speech, isolated. But actually, what is a speech? It's a reflection of a pure mind. So when the mind gets treated, when the mind gets worked on, then what's the natural byproduct of that through your mouth? That is called your speech. And speech has four components that are in the light of ahimsa. The first component is called satyam vadam. So you write down satyam vadam. By the way, what is the devata of speech?
Agni.
Agni. And why is it Agni?
It has four.
Okay, so what does fire do? Fire has two powers. It has fire to, like a dragon, right? Burn you. So if I misuse my speech, I can burn you. I can start a war. However, fire also has the power to throw light onto a topic. Therefore, devata can both be misused, but also used for throwing light onto a subject area, providing a learning environment. So speech has four components to practice that are reflective of ahimsa. Number one, satyam vadam. Satyam means truth. Vadam means speaking. That means truthful speak. This is what is satyam vadam? It is whereby what you know, what you remember, what you think right now is exactly what you say. So there's a congruence between the mind and the lips. What's the opposite of this? I know one thing, but I tell you something else in order to get a different result, right? To get a different kind of impression from you, to enact a different response. So satyam vadam is therefore congruence between what I happen to remember to the best of my abilities, because we know that memory itself gets skewed, and therefore we say, we sometimes say the wrong facts, but also whatever you know right now, however you feel, is what you say. So why is this important? Because suppose that you say, you know one thing, but you say something else. See, we think, oh, I got away with it, right? But what is this actually training your mind? It's training your mind to be misaligned with itself. Because to say something is nothing but a series of thoughts, isn't it? So if I keep on having this disconnection between what I know, what I remember, and what I say, I'm actually saying, okay, so it is one thing to say, but something else to think it. But is this person who's doing that, it's a whole integrated being, right? In other words, I'm dividing myself into different parts. Therefore, I'm living in a state of non-congruence. Now, can a person that is in a non-congruent state truly ascertain the whole vision of Atma Jnanam, which requires total congruency, total alignment between an integrated person? Absolutely not. So therefore, speech itself has a huge impact on your own mental processes of how pure, of how sensitive the mind is to its own inner thoughts. If I train my mind to be non-congruent, then if I'm trying to reflect on one little component of reality, where is my mind going? Somewhere else. Why? Because I'm been training it to not be congruent through my speech. So that was Satyam Vadam. Next one is Ritam Vadam. Ritam Vadam starts with R. So think of Ritam Vadam as researched information, researched knowledge. In other words, speak only those parts that you have well researched, that you have spent your time in, that you have validated, that you have invested your time, energy, and efforts, a lot of time looking into, specializing in. Those are the parts that are most worthy of sharing, because anything else, there's a chance of error. So suppose you find yourself in an environment or a situation or at work, and you kind of like find yourself with people talking topics that you're not entirely sure. What do we sometimes do? We contribute just for the sake of fitting in, right? Sometimes. So what does Ritam Vadam say? Unless you know that specific area, rather say nothing, because then we're doing nothing but serving society with disinformation without even knowing it. And then later on, we realize and go, oh, I feel guilty now. And then we kind of, our self-esteem falls off. So topics that are validated, well-researched, well looked into, those topics I can confidently speak. Those topics that I don't have entirely authority or research, then just bring someone into the environment. For example, I know that Lorena, she works with older generation, right? Who have a certain condition, yes? Now, suppose that the topic is about that condition. I have no right to involve myself because I don't work with those people. I don't have experience in those topics. So then I will call up Lorena and say, hey, I need some help so that I can actually, learn about this area. So that's because Lorena has taken the time and experience to specialize in this particular field. If I want to work with genetics, then Goknur is number one, right? Because she has taken a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of research and looking into and collaborating with groups and giving presentations. Therefore, she knows this area better than anyone else. So this means there is great joy talking about your topic, but also great joy gladly from top of the mountain saying, I don't know what I don't know. Therefore, I am gladly willing to offset it, to offload it to someone who does know, because your duty is not to fit in. Your duty is to throw light onto topics which are providing a learning environment for all of us. And for that, we also need to communicate with others and call those who we know are specializing in those specific fields. So Ritam Vadam, topics that are well looked into, that you specialize in. This is why it is often a good idea to avoid topics that are emotionally charged or kind of black and whitish. For example, UFOs, conspiracy theories, what did I say about COVID, where it's invented and who invented it? Or you got ghosts, you got the Illuminati, you got New World Order, right? Beings who are there controlling us, or puppets. Just keep these topics out there because they've got so much kind of controversy around them. And there's this usual energy of kind of like, I'm a helpless being and someone else is controlling me. So just, avoid those topics. It's actually quite funny because one of my close friends is in that very much area. But I'll tell you why we're able to get along so well when we talk about Shantihi accommodation. And you'll see that even if someone brings those topics, you can still be they can still be one of your closest friends if you have the right attitude. What is Ritam Vadam? It is discerning between personal opinion, that means subjectivity, and objective facts. So the question is, how do I know whether it is a personal opinion or it is an objective fact, something that is well looked into? If you don't know, as I said earlier, then you go and gladly resort to a person who does know. Because you don't know, I don't know, we go to someone who does know. So this avoids us just sharing random comments and therefore spreading disinformation. Okay, so Satyam Vadam, truthful, that means congruence. Ritam Vadam, that means well looked into, well researched. However, suppose someone's next to me and I say to them, you stink. Right? And I'm like that direct. So I applied Satyam Vadam, right? It was a truthful speak. What I know, right, is what I say. Ritam Vadam is well researched, right? Because my nose researched the fact that there's some, odor. But is that pleasant? No. Is that going to hurt them? Most likely. So this is where we have to bring in Priyam Vadam. Priyam Vadam is the third component of Ahimsa in our speech. This is whereby we apply manners in how we deliver our Satyam Vadam and Ritam Vadam. That means it has to have a certain timing, a certain method of approach, a delivery, a certain inflection, a certain tone, a certain style. I can say two things that can mean entirely one thing with different tone. They can mean two different things, just how you say it. So in NLP, we say that 7% of communication only is attributed to your words, and the majority is your body language and your voice inflection. So in that same way, Priyam Vadam is having the right manners, being careful. Now, how do you know if you're applying the right manners? You ask yourself, if someone said this to me, like what I'm about to say now, would that make me willing to comply cheerfully? Or would I kind of like, would I comply out of obligation, right? Would it be like a command? Okay, I'm going to do it, but I wouldn't feel good afterwards. Or would it kind of make me more like a playful mode? So ask yourself this, because sometimes we say the most innocent instruction to someone else, right? And then we tick them off. Same thing happens to us. You know, like close the window. It's so wide open or something, right? Why do you have to open the window so wide? And then you know, they get ticked off. So this means we always can apply the same thing in two different ways. Now, how do you know? You simply record the kind of response you got when you said it in one particular way. If it was an unpleasant response, then that is something to work on. Then you say, okay, so next time, how can I say it in a way that can be more sort of, you know, loving, you know, more gentler, more kinder, more softer approach, still firm, but soft enough as to not to offend them. So Satyam Vadam, repeat, Satyam Vadam, Ritam Vadam, and Priyam Vadam. P starts with P, therefore pleasant speech, the way how you deliver. Okay. Also with Priyam Vadam, we often interpret Priyam Vadam as not saying anything, because now the mind's gonna, you know, genius mind's gonna say, okay, so the best way to have manners is not to say anything, because there's no chance of hurting them at all. This is called silent treatment. Does this work? No, because the one who is amidst silent treatment will still interpret it according to what they are thinking. Therefore, silent treatment, not saying anything, actually only makes the mind explode with imagination, usually a distasteful thought towards the one that is giving us silent treatment. So this is also a version of Ahimsa, injury. So in other words, even Priyam Vadam is not necessarily silent treatment, even though sometimes in some situations it's required. Priyam Vadam also requires being sensitive enough to know what kind of style of delivery do I need to apply right now to my child, to my worker, to my boss, to my employees in work, to customers, and whoever you happen to be dealing with. As I said, how do you know? By recording those responses. Because what are we interested in? Growth. If we just kind of say, oh, okay, so, you know, that's your problem, that's your projection. Is any learning taking place like that? No. Therefore, what are we interested in? Looking at the responses. If they're pleasant, great. If not, that is your opportunity to look into how you have approached this particular communication. The last style is Hitam Vadam. Hitam Vadam. It starts with H. Therefore, think of it as hitting the mark. Hitam Vadam, hitting the mark. This is whereby the person is intentful. They are purposeful. So in other words, before speaking, ask yourself, what good will come out of this communication? What is the aim right now of saying this? What do I wish for audience to capture by me portraying this idea? What kind of a learning experience do I want to take place after finishing this presentation, after finishing this delivery? What is it that I am looking for? What are we trying to accomplish here? Now, I'm not saying, think like this all day long, because it's impossible, but rather Hitam Vadam is being deliberate, being intentful, and having a proper purpose. If not, what's going to happen? The mind's going to go off track. Therefore, it's going to lose focus and go into something that has no proper, it's out of structure or out of its trajectory. So instead of delivering random topics, what are we now doing? We're always bringing our attention back onto what is the intention behind this delivery? What is the accomplishing point of reference? And therefore, you always bring your mind there. So again, let's go in order. Number 1, Satyam Vadam. 2, Ritam Vadam, researched. 3, Priyam Vadam, manners, that means pleasant. 4, Hitam Vadam, hitting the mark, intentful, purposeful.
Where does a white lie? Do you know what I mean by a white lie?
Yeah, I've heard, but I don't know what it is. What is a white lie?
Okay, what a white lie is where somebody is trying to protect somebody else or not hurt somebody else by giving them the truth. So they say something that is false, but it makes the other person feel okay.
Absolutely.
So it sort of lets them down gently, as opposed to giving them the brutal truth, you know?
Absolutely. So
but it's not based on reality or truth.
So what Martin is now bringing up is ahimsa, non-injury, is not static. It's not black or white. It always has this, it's flexible. So, example that we often use is, suppose someone hides in your house and then, they're wanted. And then a thief comes and says, are they hiding in your house? Obviously, you're going to say no, because you're protecting an innocent person, right, from being injured. So in other words, you're technically lying, but you're protecting in a greater good, in a larger purpose. So in the same way, white lie, as Martin's bringing up, sometimes we need to twist the facts for the sake of preserving the greater status quo, the greater purpose for the long term, at least how you interpret it. I'm not saying it's absolutely true, but at least according to your Ritam Vadam, to your researched information, you interpret it as such.
So ahimsa is a universal value.
Absolutely.
And how I understand a universal value is which holds true in all the situations in a similar fashion everywhere. But then with these examples, it seems like it's a personal value or a situational value, not universally applicable.
Of course, it is universally applicable. When we say universally applicable, it means it applies past, present, and future. However, every situation demands a different response. Therefore, in that same way, the universal value has to bend, but without actually violating the personal value. So we're not actually, yes, we are bringing it at a personal level, but why are we doing that? Because every person goes through a different situation.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they take on the universal value, and you have to flexibly modify it in order to suit the current environment. Now, of course, when I say this, now the mind goes, oh, great. So I can now start to, lie in the name of cheating. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is you're still adhering to the universal value, but it's going to modify according to the unique situation. If someone can give me an example, that would be great.
Do I look fat in these jeans?
Oh, okay.
What are you going to say? What are you going to say? You don't want to hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah. That's a common question.
You get what I mean? Like it's sort of, you don't want to say yes.
Yeah. So is this an example of a white lie, Martin?
Yes.
Or is this a black lie? Or is this yellow lie?
No, I was thinking more along the lines of a jilted lover, where somebody's trying to end a relationship, but they don't want to tell them honestly. They just don't connect with the person. There's no chemistry. They don't like them, whatever it is. But then they might say, look, it's not you, it's me. There's all kinds of different ways of just saying something completely different to what the truth is, to actually make the person do something, manipulate the person's emotions to actually make them do something different to what they would otherwise be doing.
Well, see, now this is called manipulation. This is called now getting a certain response for my own ends of what I think is in my own self-interest. So this is already now a violation, if I'm following the example, violation of ahimsa. Because see, this is where we take ahimsa and then we twist the facts in order to kind of fulfill our own personal agenda. Yeah, so see, there's a different approach to this. You can, for example, why don't you state why don't you state the facts? Right. So, like, what is the motivation behind it? What am I expecting to gain by trying to manipulate you by saying a certain fact?
And I think that's the point. You hit it right there. It's all to do with intent. What's going on within the mind of the person who's telling the white lie? If they genuinely are trying to protect another, or are they trying to gain something and benefit from the actual telling an untruth or falsifying the situation?
Exactly. So, okay. So in other words, white lie, two categories. One of them is for personal gain. So this is a clear violation of ahimsa. It's not serving anyone else, but what I think will serve me or my little, sphere of influence, my group. The other one is on a much larger scale. Suppose you have some information that another person doesn't have, and you lie in the name of that information that you have in order to protect the larger good of the future. So in that case, yes, it is not actually a violation. For example, is it a violation of ahimsa when Krishna actually summoned war for Kurukshetra? That's another example. No, why not? Because that war was in the name of what? What was happening? The Kauravas were normalizing deception in society. They were saying it's okay to lie, it's okay to be dishonest, it's okay to kind of gamble and and just kind of like backstab each other. So they were normalizing that. And Krishna exhausted all of his options. He said to Duryodhana, give them back Indraprastha. No. Give them back 5 districts. No. Give them back 5 villages. No. Give them back 5 houses. No. Give them back 1 house with 5 rooms. No. No, 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 no. So in other words, Krishna exhausted all of his negotiation options and finally said, okay, so this Duryodhana is unwilling to contribute his, is unwilling to cooperate with us. Therefore, war is inevitable. So in other words, they had to, quote, injure in order for preserve the larger good of the future, because all of the options were already exhausted. Okay. And the third one is, so first of all, of Ahimsa, mind. 2, speech. 3, actions. In other words, deeds, karmani. So what are actions? How do we apply actions? So in other words, we always reflect on our actions. So whenever we have an emotional trigger to something, that is a perfect time when we can actually reflect upon what caused us to perform this seemingly inappropriate action or just inappropriate action. Because what's the cause? It is always traced back to a thought. In other words, you use your thought, you use your actions as tangible indicators of what is going on in the mind. So you don't look at the actions, you look at, you use that action and say, okay, what is the cause of this effect? The action is nothing but an effect, but what is the thinking cause? What will I have to believe in my life in order for me to perform this kind of action? What will I have to think about the environment, about the people that are around me in order for me to say this word, in order for me to do what I just done? And then you look at that belief, you look at that system of thinking, you look at that value structure. So in other words, we're using every opportunity to reflect into our actions. Now, suppose that you do not know whether the action that you're about to do is wise. Suppose that you're now given an option. When I say action, I'm talking about even saying something or communicating or confrontation. Suppose you don't know if it's absolutely wise or not. There's 2 things that you can do. Okay, first thing, what can you do if you're about to do something, but you're not entirely sure if it is the most decent, appropriate, sacred, clean, pure act possible, even though you're interested in applying such an act? How would you handle that? And you're put on the spot.
I think maybe if you can look at it from a future standpoint and see if you'd be happy with it, and also if you would be happy to share what you've done with other people in the future, people that you value the opinion of. No.
Wow, yeah, beautiful.
No.
Yeah. Did anyone capture that?
Yeah. And also if you'd be happy to receive that in reverse to yourself.
The golden rule, yes.
Good. Yeah. So if I did this to myself, would this open me up or would this close me down? Would this cause me to contract or would this cause me to be friendly with you? You can also ask right now, what would my best educated future, as David said, what would my best educated future self do right now? What would the wise, educated, assertive, deliberate person, me, do right now in this situation? And you can just use that, some of these cues in order to ascertain one of your best possible outcomes. Now, once you apply, that's it. That is when your sphere of control ends. So where is your sphere of control? While you're thinking, while you're in this mode of what is the best action that I could do. Once you put the action out there, that is it. So this is where we now need to accommodate the results, which will be the next value of Shantihi. Okay, now let's bring back the topic of misinterpretation when it comes to Ahimsa. Again, I already talked about the principle of Kurukshetra, like where, often we say, why does a Lord himself advise war? Why would the Lord advise go fight? By the way, when they say fight, that metaphorically means go do what you have to do right now in the name of Dharma, in the name of these values. So we often think, why does the Lord, advise bloodshed and all of this? Why? Because it is in the name of a larger good. As I already explained, all of the options have already been exhausted. When it comes to personal interpretation, then sometimes, I'll give you an example. Sometimes what we say is, I don't want to stand up for myself. I'm not going to stand up for myself, because if I do, then I'm going to rock the boat. I'm going to cause injury long-term within the family, within the environment. And for that reason, I'm not going to act. So in other words, it is fear disguised as ahimsa. This is one option. The Pandavas kept doing this over and over again. What did they do? They kept maintaining superficial harmony with the Kauravas, constantly forgiving, letting go, letting go, letting go, keeping quiet, not rocking the boat with Duryodhana. Did that fix the problem? No, that escalated it. So what did the Pandavas do? They chose to not be confrontational in the name of ahimsa. In fact, this is, Yudhishthira specifically, constantly forgiving, letting go. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to hurt you. I want to take care of you. You're my brother. You're my sister. But he just kept giving license to do more and more of what Duryodhana has already been doing. And therefore, the situation kept escalating. This is one misinterpretation example of ahimsa. Another is when we say, I'm not going to share anything. I'm not going to kind of give my opinion, because then people will think of something about me, right? So in other words, I don't want to be vulnerable, because it's going to expose myself, expose my personhood to everyone else, and then they're going to judge me. So to think like this is already ahimsa towards us. It's already himsa towards itself, because what he's saying, I'm not good enough right now. Therefore, I'm not going to say anything. So that reinforces one's own himsa. So one of a strong character in a person is to be able to share their vulnerabilities, to open themselves up to the public. So this is why it's very helpful to in classes to contribute. In fact, I made this my sole practice for the early years of my life, where whenever someone asks, can someone put their hands up? I just made my hand automatically go up. Even if I had no clue what I was going to say, I intentionally exposed myself in front of everyone. And I kept doing this for years, because I knew that there was this person that always wanted to hide and not kind of come out, and just trained me to not be, just so kind of closed down. And because, sometimes we grow up in these closed down families, and we take that on board. So in other words, it requires a lot of hard work in order to come out of our own shell. And some of the things that we can do is we can deliberately say, no, I choose to not fall into this program of protecting myself in order to appear like I've got it all handled, in order to appear to everyone else like I am smart, like I am sort of collected and cool and composed and etc. But rather, the opposite is true. The power really comes in your own character is when you're able to expose yourself to everyone else. And now, what do we often say? Well, that's fine, but I'm not going to expose myself to this group. I'm going to expose myself to some other group, because it's not an appropriate group. So this is already now putting people into boxes. So we say, so this group doesn't deserve for me to open up to them. I've got another group and I'm going to open up to them. But what's the difference? They're people over here, people over there. In other words, now the person is selectively causing a himsa to one group in their mental mode and opening themselves up to another group. So we can see how we twist the facts and twist this non-injury, and we also cause at the same time injury onto ourselves just through our thinking. The other example, a more gross example, is when we justify it to ourselves and we say, I need X, Y, Z, whatever it is. I need to make a lot of money to survive. And then the person engages in whatever means in order to make money. For example, as a traveler, right? If you travel around the world, just an example. What's the first thing happens when you get off the airport? Yeah, tigers, sharks surround you. taxi 3 times higher than it should be. Sometimes the hotel is burned down, so they redirect you, they take you to a special shop, on a commission basis, they make the money. Sometimes they say the taxi is broken down, so let me offload you to my colleague who just happens to be there waiting at the corner, right? And they'll speak in a different language you don't understand, of course. Why? In order to get that money out of you. So in other words, I need to survive and I'm going to do it at all costs. But what does actually this do to the human psyche to think like this? To cheat. So what does this mean? It's easy to be honest when someone's looking at you, but it's much harder to be honest when nobody knows. When you don't know and I can take advantage of you, then it's much harder to be honest. Is it not? Yeah. So in other words, the mark of a maturity of a mature person is not taking advantage of another, even though you know that the other is not informed, that they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the local expertise. If you're able to be honest and still advise them in that mode, in that vulnerable mode, that is a true mark of maturity. So in other words, I need XYZ to survive. And this survival is going to be done at all costs. And this is a violation of Ahimsa. And then we say, well, I need to survive, right? That's Ahimsa onto my family. I'm protecting my family. That's Ahimsa. But what are you doing that? At a cost of some other family, of a cost of someone else, at a cost of your own dignity, at a cost of your own sense of honesty. So it's not Ahimsa. It is Himsa unto yourself, but also to those who are being cheated. So let's summarize Ahimsa. Ahimsa is or becomes natural when you understand the interconnectedness of all things. I'm totally dependent upon you as a teacher. You as a student are dependent upon your teachers, upon your family, your characters, the food that you eat, on the farmers that you will never meet, on the cows who give the milk, on the sun that provides the photosynthesis and the nutrients to the plants, which you now eat and enjoy, and say, oh, I'm so strong. Let me have some protein shakes, right? So we are completely interdependent upon each other from whichever angle we look at it from. The words, the English language that you use or the local language that you use, who taught you that? Your teachers in high school. Without that, you wouldn't be able to communicate, and learn and grow as a person. Who took care of your diapers, right? Who's providing you the income? So in other words, we are completely dependent upon each other from whichever angle we look at it from. And Ahimsa is understanding this interconnectedness. Once I understand it, then the environment in which I find myself as a person is now a reminder for me to take care of that environment, and becomes completely natural. So it's not about going, oh, let me apply Ahimsa, am I applying Ahimsa? No, it's just, do you apply injury to your own body? No. So if you can extend that understanding that this entire world is my body, are you going to apply injury to the world? No. And how do you understand to that? How do you come to that point? Because, as I said, the world is interconnected itself. This body is not apart from the environment which this body is using. The air is breathing. The pollution that you put out, the pollution that I put out is the air that I breathe, is the air that you breathe. Total interconnectedness. Also, even if you apply total Ahimsa, even if you're a saint and you apply empathy and you apply the right code of conduct in a situation, guess what? Even then, people are not going to recognize it, because someone may interpret your empathy as manipulation. So it all depends on the person's own background. They may have come from a different family, and you're doing all you can to care, to nourish, to nurture whoever it is. And still, you may not get recognized. Why not? Because once they leave the school, do most of us kind of look at values of life, or we just we go straight into career mode. Let me become something. Let me become someone. Does that involve looking at values? Absolutely not. When you go to a job interview, does your employer look for, okay, you got Ahimsa, good. You got, non-injury, yeah, good. You've got not looking for respect, good. This is what we need. Is that what they're looking for? Absolutely not. They're looking for qualifications. It is another addition why we don't learn values, and therefore we don't apply them. And therefore, even in high corporations, right, high hierarchy, you've got corruption on the top. Why? Because the CEO is I'm not saying all of them now, right? Much respect to all CEOs, The CEO is too busy getting to the position. And that requires a lot of involvement, a lot of communication amongst worldly things, right? A lot of transactions. So in other words, I'm so busy getting to the top that I just don't have time to go back to the basics. And what are the basics? Empathy, compassion, understanding the interconnectedness with those that I'm totally dependent upon in order to enjoy my position as a CEO. Who is a CEO? Why is a CEO the CEO? Because of everyone else that is supporting the CEO, because of those who have promoted, have recognized the CEO's talent. I needed him or her in order to enjoy my position where I'm at right now. Total interconnectedness where we are. Therefore, Ahimsa becomes natural. So what is Ahimsa in one single sentence? It is living an alertful life. If you're living an alertful life, you cannot go wrong. You apply Ahimsa naturally. So vegetarianism, as has been brought by Robert, when it comes to values, vegetarianism isn't about health choices. We're not interested now in, be healthy. Okay, let me rephrase that. Be healthy, very important, right? But when it comes to values, it does not, in this case, apply to health choices. That is your choice. Vegetarianism is an opportunity for your mind to honor all living beings who are life itself. In other words, it makes your mind highly sensitive to living beings who are enjoying the same life as you are. Therefore, it makes you highly sensitive towards whom? Yourself, because you are part of the very life that those living beings are also part of. And you also need a highly sensitive mind to capture the most subtlest of the subtlest reality, which is Brahman itself. Therefore, vegetarianism becomes another form of exercise of your mind to build a highly sensitive mind, capturing the subtlest of the subtlest realities. You can eat meat if you wish. You don't have to eat meat. That is up to you. Because where is self-knowledge? In the intellect. Now, does this mean that if I take meat, I'm somehow going to, affect my intellect? Absolutely not. Even though some people think that is not the case, because the intellect is totally irrespective of your body. So you can eat meat if you wish or not. That is totally up to you. But the intellect itself is a product of a clear, pure mind. Therefore, and that is a sattvic intellect. Therefore, if you want to purify that mind, vegetarianism just happens to be one of an amazing opportunities to do so. Now, in the argument within the book Value of Values by Swami Dayananda, he goes into a small section about vegetarianism. And he basically says that you cannot compare your carnivorous habit to an animal. Why? Because animals don't have weapons. They hunt naturally. But whereas we humans, we have gun and we just shoot and there's the animal. In other words, when it comes to a human being, we only justify our carnivorous habit by the fact that we have a shotgun or something, a tranquilizer, and we can easily kill the animal and say, I'm a carnivore. So if you really want to, from another angle now I'm bringing, if you really want to be a carnivore, then go and, kill a cow, right? Or, do some private business there. Just like, old times.
That's an interesting topic, Andre, because I did run my own organic beef and lamb farm for about 16 years. And I started off, we bred the animals, and I started off with my own stock crate, taking the animals to the abattoirs, the registered abattoirs. And I got to see inside the abattoirs, and I was putting my animals, which I'd cared for and brought up from being calves and lambs up to the weight, and brought them to the abattoirs, and then saw the fear in their eyes, and you could sense the adrenaline pumping through their tissue, and I couldn't stand it anymore.
Yeah.
And so I actually then illegally, as it happens, decided to make sure that my butcher came to the farm. And so my animals never left the farm. And the butcher I had was a hunter.
Yeah.
And he actually had such an affinity with animals that he could walk amongst a group of sheep who would normally move away from a person, and they would just stand still, and he would touch them and feel their backs for their fat score across their spine. And his knife was so sharp that when he ran it across their neck, you could see in their eyes, there was a little bit of confusion in terms of what just happened before they actually fell over. So there was no adrenaline, there was no fear, there was no stress. and but it was totally illegal in terms of how you produce meat in this country. But I had private customers who knew what I did, and that's what we did. But I mean, it's interesting how society creates a culture which is against humanity and humanitarian instincts, but it becomes the legal norm and what you have to do. Otherwise, you're considered illegal. That's it.
The other thing about meat is, just that fear, right? Right before the killing, right? Just treatment like another number. That fear stays there, right? Energetically, and that fear also becomes part of one's diet. So you can now look at it from different sides, right? You can have natural meat. That means you go through the time to hunt the animal, to do it personally, manually, a personal conversation with them, or just kind of like get it prepackaged inside a shop with an animal that could have been your pet, right? You don't know where it comes from, what its life is, or anything about it. It's just like, okay, it's a product for me to eat. So see, there's so many sides to look at this. But let me bring this back to the original intention. And the intention was, when it comes to vegetarianism, then it becomes another tool for making your mind a lot more sensitive than it already is right now. Yeah, and it's an amazing tool for that, because you become respectful of life, and you really become kind of alert and honoring all lives in the world.
My friend, she rescued a caged chicken, like a caged hen, and she just rescued it, and put it in her own hen house, and it didn't even know how to walk. It took days to sort of start walking, because it was so used to being in one spot. The cage.
Okay.
That kind of put me off eating chicken.
I also remember seeing a video that put me off chicken was how they're going through this pipe and then just red meat falling out. When I saw this, I was like, last day.
It's kind of like, the more you see, the more it puts you off. I think we're sort of the way that our society is built up, is constructed. The meat's just in the supermarket, just packaged. That's it, and there's no thought. It's like we're disconnected from the animal itself or something.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the other side that I want to bring to this is, see, now the conversation of whether we are originally carnivores or herbivores. This is a debate, because you have to attribute now Homo sapiens, right? We also were primitive in a sense that of hunting whatever's around, right? Hunting wombats, hunting little rats and stuff. In fact, I was watching an awesome video on YouTube about a tribe, West Africa, and they're one of the last remaining tribes that are still hunters gatherers. So you can see kind of like a little preview of what it was like for us, of totally relying on nature to hunt baboons, hunt whatever's around. And they had an interview because one of the men wanted to ask them, what is most important to you in life? And he goes, meat. And then what else? Honey, meat and honey. So just kind of, I think it's quite adorable, right? If you ask a tribe like that. So, and it was a really enlightening experience of seeing, a possibility of how we evolved, from hunter-gatherers to today. So I'm not really strictly into this carnivore herbivore, because I'm also always including the evolutionary aspect to this. However, now the question comes, what about plants? Plants are also living beings, right? So in the book, it makes an argument that plants, from a hierarchical standpoint, seem to be made in order to support all life forms above it. Because an animal, if I grab an animal, what does it do? It screams in protest, just like a human being, no different. But if I pick plants, it's almost like they're just by their non-protesting nature, it's almost like they're made to sacrifice their produce for everything else. So that's one of the arguments made in the book Value of Values, and I thought it was an interesting one, of that ideally that justifies the herbivore habit of a human being.
Their emotional system isn't as sophisticated and as developed as the animal kingdom.
Yes,
and that's really what stays within the cellular structure and the DNA of the animal, and you take that on board when you eat meat. You take on the emotional aspects of the animal with it, and that to me, that's the hard part of eating abattoir meat.
Yeah, It's actually, it just reminds me, interesting seeing this video of the tribe going up a tree, and they actually pick out the honey, right, the honeycomb, and they get stung by the bees, and they don't mind at all. They just take the honey and start eating it right on the tree, and they're getting stung. It's like, ouch. And then you just take the, because the honeycomb has the baby bees, it has the wax, but also has the honey. So they just take the whole thing, the baby bees inside, the honey, everything, just naturally. It's very interesting watching this. So how much we evolved, right?
That's taking pleasure and pain to a whole new level.
Yeah, but to them it's a totally joyous experience, because the man asked them, what is happiness in life? Happiness is meat and honey. So of course, it kind of lets you know how such a man is thinking about, moment right now. No sense of future or past. It's just right now. And what is that right now? Honey and meat.
Yeah, just also relating to eating animals and animal byproducts. There's also the aspect of Ahimsa to the environment, with animals taking up so much more land and using so much more water and using so much more energy, and greenhouse gas emissions, which are, I think it's actually animal agriculture is the highest factor contributing towards climate change, due to the transport and the methane that the animals give off.
In Brazil, I understand that more land and more trees are being cleared for the sake of livestock, and therefore trees get cut down, and therefore that's less.
And also fire
CO2.
management. Fire management. I saw this documentary on indigenous backburning and controlling the land, so we don't have these disastrous massive fires. And agriculture, having land division and fencing and stuff, stops the circle of fire that they do to control all the backburning and that. The natural indigenous way of doing it.
The natural indigenous way.
The Aboriginals never had fences. They just used the topography, and they had open woodlands, heavy forested areas, grasslands, and they just utilized the geography and the topography as a way of being able to delineate what food came from where, and how to actually harvest at the right times, and using the burning to actually maintain
the circle burning. Yeah. And then they'd come back another season later, it'd be regenerating. That sort of all stopped with modern agriculture.
Well, that's as soon as they started putting fences up and delineating boundaries, the Aboriginals couldn't understand. It didn't make sense for them. It was just an obstacle, another obstacle they had to climb over on the way through, which is what then made them target practice for the farmers, because they were trespassers on their own land.
Yeah. And now we've got these disastrous fires that are uncontrollable because they haven't got backburning under control.
Okay, shall we move on to Shantihi, one of the most important values?
The Sanskrit word Shanti often is translated as forbearance or endurance. These two English words convey a slight negative connotation of resigned sufferance, whereas Shanti is a positive attitude, not painful resignation. A better translation is accommodation, acceptance. The attitude of Shanti means that I cheerfully, calmly accept that behavior and those situations which I cannot change. I give up the expectation or demand that the other person or a situation should change in order to conform to what would be pleasing to me. I happily accept and accommodate situations and people. All relationships require accommodation. This value must be built upon an understanding of the nature of people and relationships between them. I will never find in one person all the qualities that I like or dislike. Any given person is going to be a mixture of things, appealing and non-appealing. Similarly, I'm going to have the same impact on others. No one is going to find me totally likable. When I recognize these facts, I see that every relationship requires some accommodation from me.
Moreover, I may not be willing to change or be able to change to meet all the expectations that others have of me. Equally, the others are not going to change to meet all my expectations of them. Therefore, I will never find a relationship that does not require accommodation. In particular, relationships wherein I strongly dislike certain aspects of a person require accommodation from me. If I can change the person or can put a distance between him or her and me without avoiding duty, it is not a problem. If I cannot, I simply must accommodate happily. I must take the person as he or she is. I can expect neither the world nor the people in it to change in order that I may be happy. It is just not possible to compel people to change to meet my image of what they should be like. Sometimes some may change a little for me or may try to change, but I cannot count on this. More often than not, when I want to change from others, they will just strongly want to change from me. It will be a face-off between their image of me and my image of them.
When I examine my mental processes, to my surprise, I probably will find that I extend Kshanti more readily to a not so bright person than to my best friend. This is because I do not expect anything wise or intelligent from not so bright person, whereas I expect my friend to live up to certain standards that consider appropriate. A not so bright person can never disappoint me, but everyone else can. For one reason or another, at one time or another. This is not acceptable. As far as my expectations are concerned, I should place everyone in the same category. No one should disappoint me, but should only be able to surprise me. My attitude should be that I am prepared to accommodate and accept all surprises. Hence, I accommodate people the same way as I accommodate inert objects. I take them as they are. I don't like to be overbaked by summer sun, but I do not ask the sun to stop shining. I appreciate the mixed blessing of a hot shining sun and understand that whether it is a mixed blessing or not, I can't turn the sun off. I do not ask a honeybee to become stingless, nor do I hate honeybees if I get stung. I appreciate the role of honeybee and enjoy honey.
However, I find it much harder to have the same attitude which I have towards insects and inert objects towards people. I'm able to relate myself properly to an inert object or a wild creature because I do not expect any change from it. However, I expect people to be able to change, to become more pleasant to me. My mind is troubled with continuous demands for change so that others in my life will be more to my liking. Unfortunately, the reality is that people may not be able to change. Often, even if they do not want to change, they cannot. When he or she does not change, even though willing to change, it only means that he or she has no strength of will. There is nothing we can do but accommodate such a person. When the other person does not change because he or she is not willing to try, one can attempt to convince the person of the desirability of the need for change. If we cannot convince the person, there is nothing we can do except to accommodate him or her. We can say that the world is wide and large enough to accommodate all of us. Variety makes life more interesting.
Yep. Respond to the person, not to the action. In order to discover within myself a value for accommodation, I should look at the person behind the act. Usually, while responding to a person's behavior, to the person's action, I find that it is difficult to be accommodative. However, when I try to understand the cause behind the action, I put myself in a position to respond to the person, not to the action. Thereby, my response to the person can be an accommodative response. I try to see what is behind the fit of anger or outbursts of jealousy or domineering manner. I respond to the person and not to the actions. If I cannot see what is behind the actions, nonetheless, I keep in mind the fact that many reasons unknown to me set the stage for the other person's action. With this frame of mind, I find it natural to be accommodative. In a situation where my response is to the person rather than to the behaviour, I find myself staying calm. In fact, resolution of an argument between people is nearly always the result of the concerned parties' mutual appreciation as other persons, rather than any new attitude towards the precipitating behaviour.
So value 4, Shantihi, accommodation. What is Shantihi? Okay, let's go back to the book. It said, do you allow the sun to burn you? A scorching sun outside, do you let it burn you? No. But at the same time, do you complain about its presence? No. So I don't allow it to burn me, but at the same time, I also do not complain that it is indeed shining and therefore warming my body up. So this means I am accommodating the sun's presence, the sun's isness. The sun is shining its personality of heat. But how am I accommodating it? By boundaries. In other words, I am modifying or deliberately controlling the amount of exposure that I am receiving from the sun. This is called accommodation. I am neither rejecting it, at the same time, I'm having a proper relationship with it. When it comes to people, how do we apply this to this principle of accommodation? What is accommodation when it comes to people? It is whereby you produce or you allow the other person the space in which they can express the fullness of their identity. You create a space, you allow a space in which they can discover, in which they can find their own identity. Tell me this. Is this what you're seeking from the other that's close to you? What more do you want than for someone to produce a safe space, a safe where you feel secure, where you won't be criticized, where you don't feel afraid of that person leaving once they have created a space for you, in which you can play and express your own identity for the sake of whose growth? Your growth. At the same time, you're also creating that space for them in which they can discover their own identity for their own self-growth without being afraid that the space or the space creator, which is you, will leave or reject them while they're busy undergoing through their process of evolution. So what is it to mean to accommodate another person? My wife, my spouse, my children, my friends, my family, my colleagues, etc. It is whereby I allow the person, I create a space for them without causing any fear of them being afraid. That space in which they can discover their own identities, because this is why we're all here, to discover this person. And we need to create this space for another person, and they also need to create that space for us. This is called accommodation. And accommodation is most needed, as the book said, for those who are closest to us. It's actually, you don't need much accommodation if you're by yourself in a cave, right? Or, it's mostly applicable for those with families, for those who are close members in our houses. And also it can be applied in a general, that means generally with all people. How so? You firstly understand that you take on an attitude. And what is that attitude? There are differences amongst all of us. We're all like suns, shining our personalities. So instead of trying to get those personalities to change for whose sake, from our sake, rather we convert the fact that there are so many differences into learning opportunities. So we see every person as an opportunity for growth, because every person is shining a different personality which you can learn. This is one of the attitudes of accommodation. Now, accommodation is only possible with other people. Specifically, I'm going to now mention other people because this is where it really comes down to. It's easy to accommodate, as the book said, an inert object or a plant or an animal because they don't complain, right? You just tell a dog sit and dog sits, no problems there. But you cannot just tell, you're someone close to you sit, right? There's going to be some confrontation there. So how do we now apply accommodation with people, we need to keep 3 conditions in mind in order to be accommodating with other people. So what are we asking? We are asking, in order to express or to create this space for the other, in order to have a non-confrontational time, a time when there's no resistance, right? Without causing any resistance in our transactions with those that are close to us, we need to first understand that every person, including you and I, are undergoing one of these 3 possible conditions. If you don't know these 3 conditions, then it is very hard to be accommodating. We can say to ourselves, "I'll just accept them. They're going through their own kind of, trajectory." But inside, we're going to probably have resentment, and we're not going to actually accept them as they deserve truly to be accepted. So the first condition that every person may be going through is denial. So what is denial? This is whereby I don't know what I don't know. Therefore, for this person, there's no possibility of change. Now, suppose that you don't know this and you're trying to accommodate them and they don't change, and you expect them to change, but they're going through denial and you don't know that they're going through denial. Can you be accommodating? No. You're going to keep on trying. If you keep this in mind, they could be going through denial. So for them, there is no question of change. For you, you may see some blind spot, but they don't see a blind spot. So denial is I don't know what I don't know. Therefore, whatever you tell me, it doesn't apply to me, because for me, there's no problem. Let's give you an example. Now, I want you to think about this case scenario carefully. Suppose that, okay, first of all, take a moment to just think of some great talent that you have, some talent that you're, kind of expert in. Okay, so we all have talents, right? Yeah, cool. Okay, suppose your friend is enthusiastic about your talent and they can really see your shine, your personality. They're crazy about you, right? They just really adore your, your work, your hard work, your research, and the way you, your knowledge. And they introduce you to he or she, right? Your friend introduces to their friends. So now you get introduced to 5 more people. And your friend's going like, oh, she or he is so good. And, they're a teacher, they're a research, they're a scientist, they're a, they're a therapist, they're a this, they're a that. And you're just kind of like, humbly going, yeah, I'm trying my best, and etc. Right? And after your friend has introduced you, what do the 5 of them do? They go, hey, where are you from? They don't mention anything about your skills. They show 0 impressed level about your introduction. It's almost like you're just an ordinary person, right? And you generally know that you just happen to be some significant kind of, you have some role in a society, and that role is important, right? That role plays a meaningful part in people's lives. And they mention nothing about it, all totally discarding it, just normal questions. Where are you from? What you're doing? So you're around here. How do you be accommodated towards these 5 people now?
By practicing the first value, amanitvam.
Okay, amanitvam, good. So in other words, don't demand, sense of expectation. Don't have unrealistic expectations about yourself. Okay, good. So we go usually into 2 modes. The first mode is we pretend like we're unaffected. So we just go along with their conversation. But inside, we know silently, I'm hurt. Because what is our natural program expect? Hey, ask me a question or 2, right? Let's kind of have a little bit of conversation. I was just introduced, and you're totally disregarding everything that was just the whole basis of me being here was to have this conversation about what I do, because I love what I do, right? So this is a natural program. You want to kind of converse about what you do. So we pretend like we're unaffected. So we just kind of put on this show, like I'm powerful, I'm, free. I'm so detached from this world. Nothing matters to me. People are just people, right? So pretend like we're unaffected. Number 2 is we create a story to justify their reaction. And what is a story like? Oh, they don't know anything. They're just materialists. They're little children. They got a long way to go. So in other words, we create some story so that we feel good. All the while we are practicing number 1, pretending like we're unaffected, but inside of creating at the same time a story in order to justify their non-responsiveness. These are the 2 common conditions.
But surely, Andre, in a situation like that where you've got a diverse group of people that clearly aren't in the same category as you are with your special interest, aren't they genuinely trying to bring it back to a common humanity so that people can start off relating to each other at a human level as opposed to a specific level?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is another specific condition. So, however, I brought an example whereby specifically, it's almost like you naturally expected to get a little bit of acknowledgement. Absolutely. You can also say, just bring it back down to ordinary level that we can all relate to, right? To get like, tell me about your family. So this is also okay. So, but I want to talk about what happens if there's this narrative that we bring in. So now, what is the solution? How do you be accommodative? That's why I brought this example. How do you be accommodative towards these particular people now who are not paying any attention or acknowledging you? Number one, first of all, acknowledge that you are feeling discomfort, right? Right now, I may be feeling discomfort. So first of all, we're not kind of putting it under the carpet or pretending. Acknowledge it. Number two, mentally note it. Just like take a little mental note of it. And then number three, the next is when you go home, when you have some time, then you can trace the cause. And you can say, now let me go back to what Mina said. Now you can say, what is this need that I had in order to be acknowledged? Why was I like instigating or hoping they sort of approve of my greatness, of my skills? What is it in me? What is this insecurity inside me that is causing me to want a certain level of response from the other? In other words, you're looking into the cause, and then you can reframe it. And you can say, next time something like this happens, I can understand that they may not know everything. Therefore, they just simply don't have the capacity to relate onto the skill level that I have. That's one thing. That's one possibility. So in other words, why did I just share this? Accommodation is an active process. Because what is accommodation? The whole point of it is to bring those situations that we find ourselves resisting, that we're impatient towards, that we don't feel like that we don't want to accept. I can accept you, but I don't want to accept them. I can accept this, but I don't want to accept that. So there's this black or white all over the place. And sometimes we don't even know what it is, what they are, until the situation triggers us. So now what do? We take a mental note. And then later on, when we have some time, we reflect upon it. What could be the cause that's making me this needy person that wants them to relate to me in the way that I was expecting? Why did I just not go along with their conversation at the normal human level, as Martin was just pointing out? Why was I not okay with that? So therefore, we're addressing the root cause that made us uncomfortable in this example. What is number one? Denial. I don't know what I don't know. So in this example, they didn't know anything about your particular skill set. Therefore, they were in a denial state, right? They don't know what they don't know. So you have to be accommodating of that. What is the second option? The second option is they want to change. That means the person that you're trying to influence or trying to accommodate wants to change, but can't. Or even more common, this happens most often in families, they want to change, but they do not, but they're defiant towards you. Right? So in other words, when you bring up the issue, they're like, no, I don't have any problems. Let's just change the topic. But when someone else brings up the issue who they don't have the same relationship with, then they're listening. Oh, okay. Most common in families. Option three, they're in the process of change. In this case, there's least amount of effort on your part to communicate. Why did I bring these three possible conditions that everyone may be going through? Because if you don't know them, what's the result? Complaining about him or her. That's the way they are. They're never going to change. And then we create labels in order to explain our lack of knowledge about what this person is undergoing. So by providing these three examples, number one, number two, and number three, they're in denial. They want to change, but don't know how to change, which I will talk about. And number three is they're in the process of change. Then it is very hard to be accommodating because you don't know where the person is coming from. In other words, what's important to keep in mind is before negotiating, before communicating, I have to first keep a certain level of thinking, a picture of what this person that I'm talking with is going through. And that is what Shantihi is about, accommodation. Next week, I'm going to bring the question is, why do we get frustrated when attempting to guide others? We're also going to talk about how to guide another person. Like, how do you guide a person that is in denial? This is something to think about. Suppose someone is in denial right now. and they don't know what they don't know. So there's no chance of, they don't want to change because there's nothing to change. How do you guide someone like that? How do you guide someone who is who wants to change, but doesn't know how to? Or they're defiant towards you. How do you guide them? And number
Give an
three,
alternative perspective.
exactly. So we'll talk about these different methods, good, next week. And obviously number three is how do you guide someone that's in the process of change? You actually don't need to guide them, they're already doing so. So these questions we will bring up. Also, I will bring up the misconception, and that is the most common misconception of Shantihi accommodation is don't have any expectations. Just kind of, don't have any expectations of anyone, just let it all be, let it all go. And also I'm going to bring up what are the challenges when we are accommodating. And the most two common challenges are in an argument. In other words, you're trying to accommodate this person with whom you're having an argument with. That's hard. So we're going to talk about that. And also we're going to talk about how do you accommodate that one who is being confrontational. Suppose someone's confrontational towards you and it's kind of like, whoa, where does this come from, right? Sudden. How do you be accommodated towards that person? Okay, so this is next week. For now, let's go through a revision. Value 1, repeat, amanitwam. Amanitwam is humility. Value 2, adambhitwam, absence of pretense. That means the absence of having the need to make up stories. Value 3, ahimsa, non-injury. Value 4, Kshantihi, accommodation, also sometimes translated as forgiveness. So there's a lot more to Kshantihi. It is one of the most important values because it is also love. That is what love is, accommodation. And we will talk about this next week.